Hey guys, some gamer dude here. I'm actually really liking this format because it gives me the chance to talk really frankly with you. It doesn't put a lot of pressure on, and because of that, it means that I can just talk from the heart and use the knowledge I've gotten in my brain. And yeah, it might be a little bit kerfuffled and have to reiterate things to make a point, but I enjoy the format. Anywho, today I'm going to talk about a card game that's very obscure. It survives like a cockroach. I don't think that's actually a put down. It's just that anything thrown at it seems to survive. And it is the epitome of what Pojo said on his own forums, that games with smaller amounts of fan base, as long as that fan base is significantly devoted enough, yes, it sounds like a religion, the game can survive. Today we're going to be talking about the universal fighting system and why it's never been terribly popular. At least from what I understand, reading what others have said about it, discussing it with other people, and trying it off and on myself multiple times. And coming to truths about it, I guess, would be the right word. Now, the Universal Fighting System is quite the interesting card game in that it doesn't have a law or specific property. The Universal Fighting System is just that. It's a system. It's the engine. What the company that is running it at the time does is license properties, particularly fighting game properties. So Street Fighter, Tekken, Soul Calibur, King of Fighters, that type of stuff. And the properties are adapted into being balanced within those within the game. They can play off each other. The game's really interesting from a mechanical standpoint, mostly because on face value it's like, well, this is Dragon Ball cross magic. And to a certain degree, I think that's... I've made the comparison myself. The more I think about it, the more I wonder just how of a bad comparison that is. Mostly because the ideas are superficial. Yes, it has cards that are essentially drills and setups that also double as resources. That is true. It's a fighting game with punches and blocks, or attacks and blocks I should say. But this is all superficial. The way the game handles everything is incredibly unique. As I said, the cards are kind of like setups and drills from Dragon Ball are also the resource cards. You have to check the top card of your deck to see if it has a control check equal or higher to your difficulty, plus the amount of cards you've played that turn. Most cards have blocks on them, so there's no specialized block card. It's really an interesting game from that perspective. The characters, you don't exactly have massive power creep either. It's more that characters are put into two basically concepts. You're either a bit beefy and have a lower hand, or you're light and nimble and fragile with a higher hand. Basically you trade stamina for power is probably the wrong word, but in most games hand size does equal power because you have more tools at your disposal. And if you've been following that, I like Saiyan style in Dragon Ball, and if you know me way back, I loved Aqua Force in Vanguard. You'll notice I have a tendency to like these faster things where there's multiple attacks and more than the opponent can handle. I recognise that as the easiest way to win in a lot of ways. It's not always. If your opponent can deal with it, you're screwed, but But it is generally the easiest way to just strip them of their hand. And once you strip them of their hand, you're in a fantastic position in most games. Very few games that's not true. It's also why I like discard decks. And I majorly ran a discard deck in Force of Will. Because again, I don't have to attack multiple times, and I'm just removing tools from their hand. Anywho, I digress. That's another thing you get out of these this podcast format, I should say. You get those little tangents, and you learn. UFS is also has a few problems. I don't think they're really apparent to the naked eye, because you just look at the game and it's like, this is brilliance. This is ingenious. It's got a non-broken version of what is essentially the damage check of Vanguard, but predates it by around a decade, I reckon. It's got resources to make sure the check goes through. You're not caught without blocks, but at the same time, to keep blocks balanced, there's ranges of attacks, high, medium, and low. And if the block doesn't line up, but it's next to the right range, you can halve the damage instead of fully block it. There's some really ingenious stuff in there. The whole progressive difficulty means that things don't snowball, although some characters can bring cards back to the hand, so you can effectively snowball in a way. And once you get the handle of the game, I would say it's a very enjoyable game. Therein kind of lies the problem. It's also not intuitive. Many games you can just vomit your hand, or it's very obvious what to hold back and what to play. This isn't really true with UFS. You can have games and decks where you can vomit out your hand and go, I win. But that's mostly in higher constructed play and in legacy type formats. My friend has a Ryu deck, if I remember correctly, that can win disturbingly fast, and we'll get to this in a minute too, because this came up in discussions with UFS. UFS, it's not intuitive which cards to play until you start comprehending the game fully. It's not like Magic, Force of Will, any of these ones where it's really obvious. I guess what I'm trying to put over is that UFS is... I said in the living card games that many living card games are too complex to be a trading card game. They're not easy to pick up and play. UFS has that problem. It's mostly a matter of, in what order do I launch my attacks? That has to be known by the player. What ones do I hold back for whatever reason, because they're blocks, whatever? What foundations? They're the setup and drill type cards. What of them do I play when? How do I order all the cards I want to play? And what do I hold back for blocks? There's a ton of decisions to be made. And it is really hard going in balls deep. It's confusing. It will leave you befuddled. And not only this, the game has a system wherein attacks are modified backwards and forwards. This is the stack of the game, more or less. Because your opponent can try to buff up their attacks. You can try to buff down them, debuff them. And this also gets complex and long and breaks up. If you're not accustomed to it, it breaks up the momentum of the game. And this is also part of the complexity. UFS is one of those games that if you don't fully comprehend it, you're going to not enjoy it. That's probably the wrong way to phrase that sentence. You're not going to enjoy it. You need to fully comprehend the engine to get any enjoyment out of it. It's not pick up and play like many other games. You can pick up Pokemon, Vanguard, to some extent Magic, and comprehend them enough to get enjoyment out of them. I've heard the comment before that Dragon Ball is needlessly complex as well and has similar problems. UFS is vastly more complex and is harder to comprehend in a lot of ways. By comparison, I think Dragon Ball is nearly Snap. And God says, who knows what that says about the other games. That's a very high compliment, but it's also very damning, and part of the reason why you don't get people devoted to it until they comprehend it, and then they fall in love with it. It becomes an obsession type deal. Because, as I've seen multiple times, people who don't give it the time or enough time to grow on them, to fester like mold, because I like my analogies, they either admire what's smart about the game but don't like it, or they just flat out hate it and deride it. Those who give it the time adore it. I've come across these few people that swear by the game. And are they wrong to do so, or are they just brilliant themselves for comprehending it? I think it's somewhere in they've given it the time. I don't think UFS people that throw it away probably just threw it away too quickly. There's also another factor that I think sours people against the game, and I've touched on this before, and I think I think Jasco, the current publishers and developers, are trying to handle this. They are very, very good at banning cards very, very quickly if they become a problem. They'll even ban them before the set comes out. They're like, we did further testing, this is a problem, or in the next set, this is going to be a problem. We'll nip it in the butt now, or errata it. But I think they more regularly ban things. But when you blow open UFS to its constructed format from the starter deck format, a lot of broken combos or combos that can only be dealt with by highly experienced players start happening. And the game just starts, for the experienced player, starts going a million miles an hour, and anyone not experienced enough to be up to that level or have the cards to deal with it is just sitting there and waiting to die. And they're like, well, stuff this, I'm not going to play this anymore. It's BS. Somewhat true, somewhat not true. I've read the idea that the problem isn't so much that the constructed format exists at all, it's that the constructed format allows sets from different properties to touch each other. They suggest that they weren't designed with each other in mind. And that's actually, given the restraints of what a human can actually test, and the possibilities they can put together from time alone, time's going to restrict a lot. This is probably true. UFS does produce some really broken decks because of different sets interacting. Different properties, I should say. And I think that really puts a negative hamper. As I think I've discussed here before in old videos, Dragon Ball in the Panini game had a lot of people going, well, that game was broken back when it was around the first time, why would I play it now? And that's actually a fair judgment, to be honest. It's experience. It's like, well, I've experienced this before, it was stuffed, why would I want to experience it again? And it's the same problem, it's broken cards, it's unbalanced formats, unbalanced interactions. And it's really unusual because usually you find these highly broken interactions in legacy formats, not what is essentially standard, because UFS does rotations as well. But you do. And it's always been a problem from what I understand. I've read up a lot about the game because I'm one of the people that think it's a brilliant game. And as I've spent more time with it, I can get enjoyment out of it. But I only honestly find that enjoyment in the starter decks. As soon as you get up to constructed, I'm like, yeah, no thank you. No thank you to JPEG. Get the Darth Vader. No, here. And yeah, I do see the arguments for and against. And all of this crap from the complexity of the game, it's not pick up and play, and the formats that in standard that regularly just blow people away when they're starting to play. They're all the reasons I've been given, and reasons I've given myself as to why why people just don't go to the game. And this is why it's a niche game. It got a big push with the Mega Man one again. They've always tried to push it because I think a lot of people do understand, even store owners, that it is not a bad game. It's far from. It's just a higher tier of game. And probably too high a tier to be mass marketed. Look at the games we have today. They're all very, very simple in many ways. They don't have this level of decision making. And this level of, I guess you could say, through experience and comprehension of the game, you become enlightened on the game. It's starting to sound like a spiritual experience, UFS. But it's the proper way to describe it, I guess. And that's why it will never be big. I think you could probably take the same engine, morph it a bit to be a little less complex and make decision making a little, I guess, easier. It probably wouldn't be fully easier, but somewhat easier, and make it more mass marketable. The intellectual properties they get alone bring people in. You could probably make restrictions in deck building to keep it a bit more balanced. But at that point, you're ripping away a game group of people really like to service the mass market, and you don't know if that mass market are going to want it in the first place. So you've pissed off the established fans for people that are a random chance whether they'll like it. And if you piss everyone off, you're boned. And that's actually the mistake Magic made many moons ago, and a lot of games make. They change to try to appeal to mass market, and they screw up the appeal with the core fans, and the game either spikes and declines, or just doesn't. It just kind of declines. Anyway, if you're interested in UFS, I would suggest do a lot of reading. There's videos, I forget the name of the fella, but they're on YouTube. He goes into great detail about the decks. He actually, I think, works for Jasco now, because I know he's one of the moderators on the forums on the Jasco site. He's got some really good in-depth how to play videos. Not the women video from Jasco themselves. I think that's borderline useless. No offense to the women in it. It's the way the video's been shot and scripted and directed and whatnot. He just does a more frank and in-depth, more necessary how to play. I would probably suggest restrict to the deck format. The starter deck format. I'd probably say pick up the turbo decks, because with less cards in the deck, there's less decisions. I would say go in, read your cards first. Do not play the decks blind. Study them. This sounds like a lot of work, unlike other games, but it kind of is necessary. And if you give it enough time, I think you'll have fun. If you find it's too complex, don't force yourself to like it. Anyway, this has been Some Gamer Dude, and I'll see you guys next time.